Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Antler Ask Me Anything session with two of my most favorite people. I'm Rachel. I'm the Senior Program Manager here at Antler. So if you do get accepted and you do join us, you will get the pleasure of my company a lot, which Renee and Joe will obviously tell you all about very shortly. In case you missed it, we do have applications open at the moment for our February intake, and Rani will be sharing some links in the chat as we go through. But first off, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I'm dialing in from the Eora Nation. I always mangle this, I'm so sorry. From the Gadigal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and welcome you all here today. So before we kick off with the stuff that you're actually here to do in terms of listening to our founder journeys and things like that, I'm just going to run you through a couple of slides on who we are, what we do, and how we do it. It'd be interesting to see in the chat where people are dialing in from. You may have seen on LinkedIn, we are running in person in Brisbane for the first time next year, which is super exciting. I also have Rani on the call with us, who is the program lead in Melbourne. So our Melbourne founders will get the pleasure of Rani's company, and she's a bit of an ecosystem superstar down there as well. As I mentioned, I have wonderful Renee, CEO of Altai, and we'll dive in and get Renee to introduce herself in a little bit in a sec, and Joe Thomas from Enroller, CEO of Enroller, and they'll be here to share their Antler journey with you. So let's look at who Antler is. So in Australia, our Australia Fund, we launched in 2019. We've just closed Fund 2, you may have seen, at a staggering $77 million. So we have lots of money to spend. Over the course of the time with Antler in Australia, we've supported over 1,000 founders. 300 founders have been invested in, 145 plus portfolios, maybe a couple more. Next week, we have an investment committee and 3 Australian locations, as I mentioned. Antler at a global view, we're in 27 cities, and that is definitely rapidly expanding as well. Over 1,000 companies globally, 3.9 billion portfolio value, which is huge, 900 million raised. 30% of our companies have at least one woman co-founder, and those companies globally employ over 9,000 people. 41% of our companies are impact companies, which is also pretty special. So we are pretty diverse in who we sort of bring in and what we invest in. Sorry, my laptop is on its last legs. I do apologize. So just got a few little profiles here, also featuring Renee and Joe's CTO vet here with us. So we do recruit our tech and product builders and builders into the residency, our business generalists, commercialists, and our domain experts, which Renee is here repping for us today. We have founders joining from all sorts of really exciting companies. Typical breakdown of the residency is 11 years work experience. And as I mentioned before, we have a pretty decent percentage of women at the helm, which is what this session is all about today. This is a bit of a snapshot of our portfolio. So while yes, we do a lot of B2B SaaS, we also dabble in a bunch of other stuff as well, and it's growing all the time. So regardless of your idea, we do want to hear it. If it's a great opportunity, we're happy to back it. Hopefully you recognize some of those logos. Shout out to Sapien. I know we do talk about him a lot. He was actually featured on 9 News last night, which was super exciting. Sapien, for those on the call, is an at-home male fertility diagnostic test, and he is, Ash, the founder, is doing some amazing stuff. So we're pretty broad in what we invest in. Go on laptop. These are just a couple of our front runners who are from some of our earlier cohorts when we first started. So SID 1 and SID 2 have been raising significant amounts of money recently, particularly Tactic, and doing some amazing things in terms of their valuation, business, hiring. I think Past Zero is up to about 50 people hired now, which is pretty exceptional in a 4-year sort of turnaround period from investment. Another couple of people to call out, both Renee and Joe, on the call with us today, which is exciting. We've got Margot from the 1-2. If you haven't heard of them before, do check them out. It's a world first bra company doing some really amazing things. And Sky at Upcover was from our SID1 cohort. They're also just closing another round at the moment as well. And she is an absolute phenomenon. So we have some pretty amazing women in our portfolio, which we'll get into very shortly. This is just a bit of a snapshot as to what to expect when you join residency, and I'm happy to take questions on this later as well. So obviously selection, go through the interview process, we then onboard you, we do the fun kickoff stuff where we'll have everybody in Sydney for the first week and then get into the content side of things. Then a lot of idea validation sessions, office hours with the Antler group. Once we move you through the first milestone in our due diligence, that's when we get you all ready for investment. Pitch for investment, ideally it's a yes, and then our portfolio team steps in to kind of help you through that next fundraising rounds. So there's a lot of support that we provide sort of end to end from onboarding, ideally up until Series A. And let me just talk to you through a new cool thing that we've actually launched this year, our agreement of rolling capital, which Renee and Joe have both benefited from, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So what that means is post-Antler investment, our teams will go out and raise minimum of $300,000 from another investor or investors, and we commit to come in at a third of that round. So you've already got a third of your round committed while you're going to talk to other investors. We've had a lot of teams take advantage of that just recently, and it's really accelerating our business's growth and trajectory. Again, we can ask questions about that shortly. We also have the benefit of being a global company as well, which that means is we have a global access fund that sits over across all of our funds. So where our businesses are looking to expand globally, we have that support on the ground, but we also have money to help enable that as well. So that's all the boring stuff from me. I will just do a little bit of a plug. We have a bunch of other AMAs coming up. So if you want to hear from more of our portfolio founders from a diverse range of backgrounds, Rani's going to add those into the chat for you. Please feel free to connect with Rani and myself on LinkedIn and Renee and Joe as we go. Just in terms of general housekeeping, please keep your camera on. We want to see those faces. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as well, but we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Sound good? All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll dive into some questions. Let's start with some introductions. Welcome, Renee and Joe. Appreciate you giving us your time today. Renee, please introduce yourself and Altai.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me. I'm Renee, co-founder and CEO of Altai. I apologize in advance if I stumble a little bit. I'm severely jet lagged. I started as a performer in this industry after studying science for some unknown reason. And then I went on to producing and managing in our industry. So I was an agent for over 15 years, and I was the GM and registrar of an acting college. Extremely busy and rewarding, but I just wasn't being challenged towards the end of that part of my career. Altai is a single seamless casting platform. So we're on a mission to transform the audition and casting process globally. Currently, our industry and media in general is really evolving with digitization and globalization, and there's a lot of demands for accessibility. So it can be sometimes hard to explain our problem space, but if you look at the last thing you watched on Netflix or Stan, the last movie that you watched, or the last TV commercial that you laughed at, every single one of those productions has a full audition and casting process. And currently, the platforms that are used to conduct those processes are extremely archaic, and they're plagued by lack of efficiency, barriers to entry, and all of those financial implications. And there's really a void of any meaningful data in our whole industry. So Altai is starting to be the solution for all of those problems. And yeah, we went live in December 2022, so 23 months ago tomorrow. And we've hit over 20,000 profiles in Australia and New Zealand. About 4,000 of them are paid profiles. We have profiles such as Chris Hemsworth on Altai, and exclusive briefs from really high quality streamers like Apple TV, Netflix, Disney, and Sony. And just in the last few days, hence the jet lag, we have launched in Mexico City to the LATAM market. So that was really significant for us, really exciting. And alongside that, we launched digitally on a global sort of level. So anyone globally can register on Altai. And that's me.
Huge. And also some pretty sweet merch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here we go.
Rachel's got
yeah, I do. Jo, please introduce your lovely self and what you're doing with Enroller.
Beautiful. Hi. So I'll copy Renee's format because that's a good one. So I always joke that I'm old compared to all the other founders, but actually most of the founders were around the same age. So I spent the first half of my life at iSelect and at Compare the Market, in executive roles there, running sales and marketing and product. And then I always wanted to do my own thing, and so I partnered with an old colleague of mine and randomly imported LED lights and built a LED light wholesaling business for 3 years. Realized that I really hated selling physical products. The inventory management I love buying things. You can see how much stuff is behind me, but yeah, trying to manage inventory was terrible. And so I went back into sort of corporate and ended up running the Australian Institute of Business, which is an online MBA provider. So I joined there as COO and then left as CEO. And that really gave me, I think, an insight into how education can transform people's lives. But also deep frustration, because I would stand there at graduation and I would shake the hand of the 70% of the 3% of people who inquired about an MBA who actually finished. And I would hear how it changed their life, and I would be deeply irritated that 99 out of 100 people who bothered to inquire didn't get to experience the benefit of that life-changing education. And honestly, if they'd gone and enrolled with a competitor, I would have been like, oh, well, we just need to try harder. But the reality is most of them didn't. And so I became obsessed with understanding why people don't engage with education. And through that process, realized that it's actually not that similar to why some people don't like making insurance type decisions. It's complex. There's a really high cost of getting it wrong, but you don't know until it's too late. It's not a decision that you make very often, so you don't really have a frame of reference in how to make it. And so you just lack the confidence to do it. And so it's not that education providers lose students to other education providers, and it's not that students decide not to do education. They just don't decide to do it. And so they procrastinate. And that really became a stone in my shoe. And at the same time, I'm running an education provider and I'm thinking, oh, I'd love it if someone could just give me ready to enroll students and I didn't have to do all of the sales and marketing myself. And so I quit my job and joined Antler. And originally we intended to build Enroller in the higher ed space. But very quickly through the Antler residency, I realized two things. So the first is that selling to higher education is really hard and they take a really long time to make decisions about things. But also the way people choose undergraduate university education in Australia, it's really hard to add value and capture some of that value because it's done through your ATAR scores, your preferencing, the tertiary admissions centre. And so, how do you build a viable business? And the scale just wasn't there. And we started talking to vocational providers, and all of those dynamics that I had seen when running a higher education provider, it turns out that MBA students, yeah, they may have more successful careers than the sort of people who want to engage in vocational education, but it's the same. Vocational students often haven't had a great experience with education. For them, education is possibly more transformative because they are underemployed, they are unemployed, they are in careers or jobs that will not serve them throughout their life. As a result, they have uncertain housing situations. They didn't really know, no one at school knew how to tell them to go down a vocational pathway. And so that complexity is just as high, if not worse, in vocational, and the people had even less of a framework to decide. And it turns out that talking to RTOs and independent vocational providers is great fun. And they are still not super quick to make decisions, but there's at least no subcommittees, like there always is at a university. And so essentially what Enroll In now is a way to help people confidently get enrolled in a good quality course with a good quality provider, and we do the decision making for them. So they don't have to figure out what the right decision is. We figure out what they need, and then we tell them what the right decision is, and we build enough trust along the way that they're grateful. And then we send those students through to a provider. So it's completely free for students.
Awesome. Really great introduction. Rani, I'm going to go off script. I apologize in advance because I think you've covered a few little bits and pieces. What I'd love to dig into a little bit more, we'll start with you, Renee. Well, one, obviously, why Antler, but also a big part of people building successful businesses with us, and Joe, I think you've touched on this as well, is that validation piece. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more around, Renee, well, one, obviously why us for you, but also your validation process and maybe some of the lessons that you learned along the way.
Yeah, sure. So our validation process, I guess, was a bit different. So we joined my co-founder, Josh, he came up with the idea of Altai, and we had worked together previously. So we bootstrapped Altai and was a bit naive in the tech space at how much things cost, and very soon realized that Altai was a VC backable business, but I had to learn what a VC backable business actually meant. So we came to that realization, and within a few months, we were getting in touch with VCs and getting really great responses about us as a team, about what we had built and the traction. And there was a lot of interest, but there was a lot of discomfort about our industry. It's a very sexy industry, but even though it's essentially media mixed with a bit of HR, a lot of VCs at the moment are sort of using LinkedIn as a bit of a comparison. So many like similar but not. But there was a lot of thank you, but maybe come back when you're at a different round or you've got some more traction, because they were just really nervous about our industry, understandably. So then I met with one of the Nina at Antler, I think it was, and there was just this completely different openness to, it wasn't about the industry and the problem as much. It was more about us as a team and how passionate we were and how hardworking we were, and there was less of a weight on the fact that we were from the entertainment industry, we hadn't been founders before, and things like that. So that really gave me a lot of comfort, and we're at a place in our journey where we needed to pivot, something needed to change, and we just felt deep down that when we started talking to more people at Antler, that there was a lot of trust and comfort there. It's an unusual situation when you sign up to the cohort, and that didn't deter us for some reason. We just had a real trust when we went halfway in through the residency, that everything that like the education that I had personally missed, it was everything that I didn't know. So I was so excited to get entrenched with that. And not only, Rachel, the support that I got from her, just being completely remotivated and preventing me from honestly actually burning out. it was having all of the partners and a group of experts that were already thinking 12 months ahead than what we were obsessing with right now, and just having so many different conversations and not changing everything about Altai according to their comments on what they thought, but we learnt something with every single conversation. And that was also a tactic as well. You always want to make sure that everyone on the Antler team shares their concerns before you go to IC. That's just a tip. But yeah, I mean, it was just one of those processes where if I could give advice, it's just you get out of it what you put into it. I personally got so much out of it, but you do have to take it seriously in that your personal life is affected if you're not prepared to prioritize it to some extent. You have to be, you know, I'm type A anyway, but extremely organized. And I think I probably found that more of an effect than others, maybe because we already had customers. So as much as I was doing these sorts of types of webinars, I also had users calling me on the phone. But in the same sentence, I could say that I found it easier because I already had a problem that I was so passionately aware of how to solve, and I already had my co-founder. So if I put myself in the position of other people that I've been sitting next to for the last few years, if I didn't have Josh, my co-founder, and such a deep understanding of my space, having that support around me would be the only way that I would be able to sort of see it through. Yeah.
Awesome. Joe, in a similar vein, obviously you are CEO of Australian Institute of Business, so like, you know, on paper know how to run a business. I'd love to get your take on like what the content actually, what was surprising about the content. Obviously, you know, you'd come to us for a reason. What were some of the perhaps more surprising parts of your Antler journey?
So I joined sort of purely for validation. So I'd quit a good job. The reason Rachel doesn't ask why Antler is because my answer is, oh, the timing suited. I'd missed the start mate one, and I was pretty agnostic, and I was like, oh yeah, they'll fit me in before the end of the year.
So you can tell I've not prepped either of them on what to say, right?
But I say it was the best decision ever. Like as much as it, what I wanted to do was to do an accelerator, because for me it was a big risk to quit a good job, and my partner, who's far more sensible than I am, I needed that validation. And I think, you know, to Rachel's point, I knew how to run a business, but running a business with 150, 300, 500 staff is very different to running a startup. And my co-founder Yvette and I were quite ruthless about hitting the milestones throughout the process. So we did first track out, we did first IC, even though we definitely didn't exist. So unlike Renee, I came in with an idea, but I was willing to change the idea. And I think, and Renee mentioned this, I think understanding what a VC investable business is versus a good business, and even a PE-backed business. So Australian Institute of Business is half owned by a private equity firm. And so, you know, EBITDA, like revenue growth, profitability, like incremental growth, you know, that's been optimizing things. That had been my bag for 20 something years. And I had plans to build a good business. And it's not that VC businesses aren't good businesses, they're just a different type of business. Yep. Far more of a focus on tech, far more of a focus on growth, not at any cost, but at probably a higher cost than I would naturally have erred toward. And actually get to scale is more important than getting to profitability. Whereas, you know, I still have to be like, what do you mean we're not profitable? And we've existed for 11 months. And so I think getting a head around that VCs don't just invest in good businesses, they invest in businesses that fly close to the sun, and a lot of them will crash to the ground, and they're okay with that, because the ones that go kaboom will go really kaboom. They won't be a 10 times return on money, they'll be 1,000 times return on money. And so I think getting my head around that and actually making the decision, and my co-founder Yvette and I spent a lot of time having this discussion whether that was the sort of business we wanted to build. So, not 21 anymore. Do I want to spend technically the best earning years of my life earning minimum wage for something that for an investor is 1 of 100, but for me is 1 of 1. And possibly the last one. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to go and found another company at 60. And so, do you want that pressure of VC? Do you want that approach, or do you want to build a nice lifestyle business that kicks out, $500,000 of profit and you'd have a nice life and carry on? And so I think really getting my head around that was an important part of that Antler journey, because I just thought a good business was good business. I thought it was a homogenous thing. And because that had been my job for a really long time. I think the second piece, both during cohort but even since, has been around sort of confidence to shoot for the stars. So, I've come from roles where if you say you're going to deliver 10, you better deliver 10 or you just don't have a job. You certainly don't say you're going to deliver 25 and then deliver 12. You say you're going to deliver 10 and then you deliver 11 and everyone's thrilled. And so even going through the subsequent fundraising process, it was seen as a lack of ambition, which is hilarious for me because I've never been called lacking in ambition ever in my life. And so that I think was sort of a post-cohort learn, but I sort of wish I'd picked up on that. I wish I'd made that leap while I was in cohort, that it's not about what you will do, it's about the possibility. And even if it's only a 5% chance of getting that possibility, that's okay. Whereas I was like, you've got to be 90% sure. And that's not what VCs are looking at. They're looking for the moonshots that maybe will happen, maybe won't happen. And it honestly took me a really long time, both in cohort and after, to get my head around that. I think the second piece, again, just to sort of bounce off Renee's, was having a co-founder. So before joining Antler, I was like, I know how to run a business. So I'd hired an outsourced IT company to build me an MVP. I hadn't actually validated anything yet, by the way. So validate is probably another big lesson. But I went and built I've never used the MVP. That's 15 grand, I'll never get back. So I went and built an MVP because you just build something, then you go and sell it. Like, that was my approach to building a business. But tech's really expensive. It's very expensive to hire good tech people. And B, having an actual co-founder it takes some getting used to. So I met my co-founder outside of Antler, but she'd actually done Antler already. So she'd done Antler in Amsterdam. We met just sort of via a founder matching platform, and then she joined me in Antler. I call her my most successful internet date ever. Neither of us were deliberately trying to have a double female co-founding team, but here we are. I think also the value of an idea when it comes to a co-founder. So for me, this was my idea and it was my business. And you're just going to give someone half of it because that's what's expected, particularly if you're joining with just an idea. And I really struggled to get my head around that. And I'm so glad I did, because we are 100% in it. And we are 100% in it together. And guess what? An idea is worth absolutely nothing. You're sitting here thinking your idea is worth nothing. The amount of people I tell about Enroller, and they're like, oh God, that's a good idea. I've been thinking about that for years, but no one's ever blooming executed on it. So an idea is worthless. It's bringing the idea to life that has value. And so that like, you have to have a co-founder. I was like, all right, fine. And don't really get why. That was right. Like, Antler was absolutely 100% correct on having a co-founder. Also, it's kind of a hard journey. So having someone on it who, and Yvette and I are, if you were to imagine two completely opposite people, that's us. But we can still have conversations like today where it's like, oh, I'm having a crisis of confidence, or I think I'm freaking out about this thing. Like, what are we going to do? Because it is a bit like this. And to be honest, for us, it was like this for 9 months, and now it's doing this. And so we weren't used to it. And so we were like, oh my God, we thought it was so easy. So having that co-founder who's in, but also, you know, could I have gone, oh, I'll have 55 and you have 45? Probably. But in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, is winning that stupid imaginary battle today worth the potential resentment, feeling of being shafted that could come in the future? It's not worth it. And so that was really useful. And then the final thing was just validation. So I honestly think that Antler probably saved us, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars, and actually meant that we went live and were revenue generating 7 weeks after the Antler investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we would have been. I actually think left alone, I would have been designing logos and building tech platforms and just like, I don't know, like doing strategy or something. Like, I don't know what I would have been doing, but I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have been generating revenue. So 19 weeks after I quit my job, we were generating revenue. And I honestly think Antler saved us 6 to 12 months in terms of just do it. And part of that was because a lot of VCs don't love a marketplace model. Mine's essentially a marketplace model. A lot of VCs don't really love ed techs. I'm contrary. So the minute everyone was like, I don't know if this really works, I'm like, all right, well, I'll just go and make it work and then I will prove it to you. So part of it was just, you know, I was motivated by spite.
That's why I love you so much.
I'll show you. But yeah, I think that just that acceleration of like doing the things that move the needle, not the fluffy random stuff, was priceless.
I think it's the fluffy random stuff is the easy stuff. The stuff that moves the needle is the hard stuff. So, you know, you're sort of talking about like, you know, working on logos and strategies. That's not putting you out of your comfort zone to get on the phones and cold call a bunch of people and put yourself out there and be really vulnerable. And that stuff's much harder.
Yeah.
What I want to dive into next is, so both of you took advantage of the agreement of rolling capital. And so I think one of the things is, and Joe, I really loved in the session that you ran as part of the last residency, is that the Antler money is the easiest fundraising that you will ever do. So I would love to hear, I'll start with you, Renee, and also what you've sort of been spending the money on, because I know you've got some really exciting things happening. So if you can talk to me about the sort of follow-on fundraising process, that'd be great.
Yes, well, the follow-on fundraising for us was honestly a bit of a journey. So I'm not sure how long Antler has been doing the follow-on, the process that they've just been publicizing, but we were very lucky and we benefited from that. And that sort of started, Antler committed to that when we had significant traction in a new market, in the LATAM market. So that was really helpful to us to show other VCs that had a lot of interest, that there was that trust from Antler. We still had to go to IC though. So I noted that you don't have to go to IC again. So I don't.
We just wanted to see your pitch again, Renee. The pitch deck was so beautiful.
Got it. But yes, having Antler involved in our follow-on was absolutely essential for me personally. The support that I got from James in particular was just, it was incalculable. He made phone calls to keep things going. I had a real fear, and he told me that it was unfounded because the VCs that we had in our round are really reputable and there was no way they were going to back out. But just everything took so long, and he just kept things moving for us. Even in terms of us getting a deal, a term sheet that was the most in favor of us. And all VCs will tell you that, of course, they're going to look after you, because if they don't look after the founders in the company and they take advantage of you, then that's not good. But there is definitely just that really strong element from the Antler partners that they would, and they did in our round, sacrifice Antler for us. So Antler actually took less than what they could have, and sacrificed their stake in the pie for the sake of Altai and the round. Yeah, we just had a really difficult process in terms of just the administration. I don't think it's very common, because I had phone conversations with James and one of our other great VC backers, Scalata, and they actually said to me, "This is not normal. You should never go through this again." And that really helped me not want to just give up and not ever do it, because doing the follow-on raising and running Altai and knowing that the reason why we got the raise was because we needed to launch in another international market, that sort of pressure was just, it was huge. So yeah, we got our first investment from Antler last September. Then we always knew that we needed to do follow-on pretty much straight away. So we started that off around December, when we'd sort of increased our traction. And then we closed terms and had to knock a few people back. We were oversubscribed. That's another word that I liked to learn, in February, but then we didn't actually close until April. So that was another sort of stressful situation, because I had to have plan B, the possibility of needing to access R&D loans to, fund Altai moving on. One factor that we've had to deal with, and it's probably the whole con of Altai's setup, is that none of the co-founders are CTOs. They're not technical. So we do spend a lot of money on tech, and we've got great tech employees. Our lead developer is also female in Western Sydney, which I'm very proud of. And we've got a few developers in Sri Lanka who have actually been with us since the beginning of when we built Altai, starting in COVID. But yeah, just having that responsibility of, I would still feel fearful that the deal would fall through months later. I never want to go through that again. So, but just having Antler support, and not only now, but knowing that when I'm talking to VCs now, and it's getting more and more exciting, I'm being approached by angel investors in LATAM and really prominent VCs in New York, that we still have the support of Antler globally with such a big, deep pockets, is really comforting, because I know that I can always go to the team and discuss openly what they think is best for Antler, for Altai, because they were in so early, and it is such a big deal for them. Because it's just the economy just goes up and down. And I think that's also another factor why our follow-on took so long. But yeah, if anyone ever needs any sort of nitty-gritty into because we've got some quite reputable VCs on our cap table now, and also some experience with some angel investors. That was some pretty interesting processes. I'm always happy to have frank conversations. I'm probably too direct, so yeah.
No, that's why we love you. James does actually reference the Altai follow on as the hottest deal in Australia for like a full week there, where everyone was trying to get in on it. So Joe, I know that you ended up being oversubscribed as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience for you? I know it was a lot of pounding pavement.
It's interesting, because I think by the way, mine took the same amount of time, Renee. So I started in April, started in March, really. And then, so started in March, we closed in sort of June, July, and didn't get the money until September. And again, reputable VCs, but we had lots of the people who'd been doing our deals all quit their jobs. Just literally all of them at the same time. So like the lead from Scalata, who was leading our deal, he quit. or left. Jessie Wu from Afterwork, who led the deck, she was gone. I actually said to Seamus at Antler, I was like, just a heads up, are is your employment safe? Because anyone investing in this round is unlikely to be employed in the next 3 seconds. And so we just got
Jury's still out on Seamus.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm gonna roll back even to before the oversubscribing. So the best advice anyone gave me was a friend of mine who was an exited, well, failed founder technically, but so he'd raised a fair amount of money, and he said to me early on, you'll need to talk to 60 investors to get 3 to invest in your round.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've run sales teams for most of my life, so I was like, all right, no problem. And so I started pounding the pavement really early. I think because I'm so new, I've never raised money before. So there's most things I've done when it comes to running a business, but I had never raised capital before. And so I think I was like wildly naive, but it was also super fun, but very hard to get a result. And so my sort of advice to everybody is, at least with Antler, there's a defined process. Like you do the cohort, you track out, you pitch at IC, and they either say yes or no. And you literally will know the day that they're going to say yes or not. You'll be like, on the 31st of October, I'm either getting investment or I'm not.
Yeah.
VCs in Australia are really nice, like super nice. And actually, as women, I think the top of the funnel is probably quite wide for us. I think a lot of them want to meet more female founders. And so I found it super easy to get meetings, like super easy to get meetings. And everyone was lovely. Oh, we love the idea. Oh, you're the domain expert. Oh, if anyone can make this work, you can make this work. And so you sort of walk away thinking, oh, well, they're going to give me money. And so I'm really grateful that my friend basically told me that the conversion from like, we love you to we'll give you money was going to be a bit rubbish. Because I think I wouldn't have done the legwork if I had thought that there was a correlation between we love you and we'll give you money. And that's probably the bit of advice I give to a lot of the founders in my cohort now who are fundraising, which is do not put all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I mean, we had some investors say to us, oh, we'd value you at X significantly more than we ended up getting valued at. And we just want to take the whole round. Like, we'll just give you millions of dollars and then nothing. And so it was definitely, you just have to fill the pipeline. And some people will reject you. And I have to say they were my favorite ones second to the people who actually gave me money. They're my favorite ones. But I was really grateful when people just said no, because I knew I could stop chasing them. Some of them gave me really good feedback. Though I would say my advice on feedback is listen to all of it, ignore a lot of it, because a lot of it will conflict. So things like your pitch deck, they'll be like, oh, we hate the Antler pitch deck because it always has this. And so, you take something out. And then the next one's like, where's the competition slide? And you're like, oh, the last person said they didn't like the 2x2 matrix for the competition slide. And then, you put in this is what we're going to use the money on. And then it's like, oh, I don't like seeing that. And so I stopped asking for feedback on my pitch because I realized every single person has their own unique view of what should be in a pitch deck or not. And you're never actually pitching, you're just sending it as a document. So, feedback about how you're engaging with VCs is super useful. Getting to understand what investors' mandates are. So no one a lot of them don't want to say no because they're like, oh, if someone else falls, then maybe I'll be in. And that was where the oversubscription happened.
Yeah.
So we went from nothing to oversubscribed in a day. Because I had Antler, I had a bunch of angels, but I didn't have a lead, and I needed a lead to get Antler, and I needed Antler to still have to fill the round with the angels. And then we had another VC coming on board, Scalata, and we weren't quite sure how much they were going to put in. And then we had a big angel at the last minute join who took a really significant chunk of the round. And so I literally went from $0 to $1 million in a day. And a bit like Renee, whether you want to take that extra money depends a lot on what your valuation is pre that money and how much you're willing to be diluted. And so I ended up having to kick out all of the friends and family agents. And deliberately went for VCs and a strategic high net worth investor. And that, I think you do have to be quite ruthless about, you go through a phase, you're like, I'll take anyone. Like, I'll take $1 if they give it to me. And then you have to go, who's really going to add value? And, you know, if you're a B2C business, then having venture capital on the table really does add value. Because you can, if you've convinced them, other VC are more willing to consider you as an entity. If one of your investors has been successful in this sort of space before, that really adds value, both in terms of investor confidence, but also you can actually just say to them, hey, have you done this thing before? How did it go? So we were quite strategic about who we chose when we oversubscribed.
Yeah. I just want to add one thing that I forgot to mention, and I don't know how common this is, but it really shocked me in the follow-on round, was that we had a situation where two VCs aligned, and either one of them was happy to lead, but they wanted the other one in the deal. And at one point, and we were pretty much happy with one of them to not be in the deal, but we were forced to almost, I'm not sure if I could have said no, to include them in the round, which meant we had to kick out other people of the deal. So I don't know how common it is, but to be told who is going to fill the round, there was that pressure there. And by that point, I just wanted to close it. So
it's time consuming.
What I'm going to do now is I know we can talk fundraising until we're blue in the face, and obviously you're all privy to three best friends catching up in an audience. So I'm going to kill it there so that you get to ask your questions. But I hope what we've covered so far is useful. We'll get a little bit more specific now. So love to get your thoughts, best friends. Why do you think there's such a hesitancy in the ecosystem to build a B2C startup, and what can be done?
I think a lot of it, at least from a marketplace point of view, is that B2C is small ticket sizes, and often paid acquisition. So it's really hard to build a B2C brand without spending on paid marketing, whether that's Google or Facebook or others. There is often less network effect in B2C than there is in B2B. But obviously, if it goes well, then often it's a much bigger market. So it is definitely, I think, probably a riskier proposition, but VCs are more comfortable with risk. I think what you've got to be really clear on is size of market. And so I think a lot of people, when they're building B2C, they're like, you know, it's people in Queensland who love dogs and who do the and you niche it down so much that what you're probably building is a really good business, but not a VC backable business. And I had this issue a lot because vocational education is B2C, though there's I mean, technically it's actually the businesses who pay us, but fundamentally it's consumers that I'm monetizing. Educated people don't know that it's a $16 billion market just in Australia. And so that became kind of the first slide of everything, just to be able to show them that A, it was a high ticket size rather than the classically B2C small ticket size, and B, it was a big market and a constantly replenished market, because that's it's why investors love recurring revenue. So they love subscription B2C markets because at least it just keeps recurring. Whereas one-off consumer, once you've penetrated the market, there's kind of nowhere to go. Whereas the nice thing about education, particularly with school leavers, is they just keep new ones, keep being available. And so those were the dynamics that personally I really had to amp up in being that sort of B2C. And also, how do you acquire leads at a low or no cost? I haven't cracked the answer to that yet, but that was a really important one to think about, because a lot of businesses, their CAC exceeds, so the cost of the customer acquisition cost will exceed the revenue that they get from that. So that was the other thing that I talked about all the time. Here's what my CAC will look like. Here's what my revenue per sale will look like. And being laser focused on, why do people freak out? Size of market, cost of acquisition, and then having answers for those means I think you can get over that hesitancy with B2C.
Maybe we need to get you on TikTok, Joe. That's how Spoonie grew their wait list to about 22,000 in 5 weeks. Yeah. If you're not following Spoonie, it's one of our more recent investments. They're amazing. They're cleaning up all the startup awards at the moment. It's a social media platform for neurodivergent, chronically ill, and disabled people, and they are unreal. Follow Spoonie. Karen, I know you've been very patient there with your hand up. Hit us with it.
Oh yeah, hi. I've got Children and Simpsons on in the background, so apologies in advance.
It's okay.
We're on episode number 39.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rachel, Jo, and Renee. I've just, for a bit of background, I've just finished up last night Flying Fox's pre-accelerator program, which was just fantastic. And I was lucky enough, I went to Harvard Business School and did my MBA, but that was 20 years ago. I'm an old woman. And I've really enjoyed doing the Flying Fox program, because when I studied entrepreneurship with Bill Solomon 20 years ago, it's very different to entrepreneurship today, especially with the lean canvas, the MVP, all of that fun stuff, which I've really enjoyed learning about. I think my only hesitancy with Antler is this co-funder model. I don't have a I'm totally on my own. I am a SaaS, tech heavy business. But rather than going down the co-founder route, I'm thinking more ESOP for something like that. And my concern with the co-founder is, a co-founder almost has to last even longer than some marriages last. And, I am worried about, this of just having the wrong co-founder. And I just want to ask about that process and how committed Antler is to that. If it doesn't, if it does not work out, if I were to enter and if I was lucky enough to enter and I was like, what, there's no one here. Does that happen? Because I really am, I want to be very selective. If I do go down that co-founder, it needs to work. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Karen. Jo, you're probably the best to answer that. I know you gave it a red hot go in your cohort, but you always had a vet just sort of dancing around in the back. So you're probably the best to answer that one.
Yeah, I did. So yeah, I'm not an organized type A. I'm more of just the control freak. Probably no one will do it as good as me type A. So I started looking for a co-founder. And there's a bunch of platforms if you Google that you can find. So I started looking for a co-founder even before I started Antler, because what if I haven't recruited anyone who I really like? Because that sort of same piece. But I was really honest with Yvette, my co-founder, that I was dating while I was at Antler, and maybe I would end up with her, and maybe I wouldn't. I would genuinely, it did take me a while to get the head around, but a co-founder. And I think Antler does three things that are great. So the first thing they do is they assess that match as part of deciding whether or not to invest in you. And, I've heard from other founders where they were like, we just don't think your co-founders as invested in this as you are. We don't think that you have a complementary mix of skills. So, they'll be pretty honest, because they're about to hand over $250,000. So if it turns out you guys are a bit rubbish, then and they're not in the romance. So they're actually able to look from the outside and be like, we see a red flag. So I think that's really useful. But even before that, there's a bunch of tools that they give you. And the one that I loved the most was the 50 co-founder questions. Honestly, I think people should do this with their husbands or wives. It takes about 4 hours to write down all of your answers. It is, look, Rani's face just went 4 hours. And then it probably took us another 4 hours to go through them together because we were strangers. So as much as I met her before Antler, we'd actually never met in person until we were at Antler. So she's based in Perth, I was based in Adelaide at the time, and we met in Sydney. So external, but not unlike Renee, not someone I'd ever worked with before. We are together purely for the purposes of building this business. But the 50 co-founder questions force you to interrogate how you will deal with conflict. What does good look like? How long are you in it for? Because it might be, you know, Yvette and I have both had quite successful careers. And so for us, you know, exiting for $1 million in 5 years' time, that's not a great outcome. Like we'd just go and we'd do better just having a job. You know, we're probably not in it for 25 years because I'd be in my 60s and I'm not sure that I want to be doing. And you know, she's not far behind me. And so just really getting clarity on questions like, well, what if it turns out someone would be better at doing your job than you? What does an exit look like? What about, and it forces you to go, oh, these things can happen, which I didn't even know could happen. But it forces you to have that conversation, and it was a significant investment of time and energy. And so we filled them out privately, and I did this with several people, and then we would email them to each other at the same time. So no one's getting influenced by the other person's answers or doing that thing of like, oh yeah, me too. So it's truthful. And then we would sit down and sort of discuss things. And I think the third piece, and actually I really struggled with this, and then I now think it's awesome, was there's a vesting schedule. And so as much as you technically are giving away half of your company, neither of you really own anything, because you have to be in the business in order to actually own that percentage. And I have friends who've had founders and they've had a breakup after 2 years person out, and they haven't really created that much value. And so this vesting schedule, it hurt my little heart. A, half the company. B, technically I don't really own any of it. Like that was a real ego thing for me to get over. But I now see that it just gives you, it's a prenup. And it means you're not having to pay alimony once that person's no longer adding value. And if you do have a breakup, and of course you want to avoid it, but I felt pretty comfortable after that.
I guess I'm just going to jump in on a VC perspective as well. Like obviously there's always outliers, there's always exceptions to the rule, but you know, typical team formation is one to build it, one to sell it. As Joe learned a very expensive lesson outsourcing tech that no one wanted to buy, that can slow things down. It's really expensive. It takes away your ability to quickly iterate your product as you're validating with your customers. It keeps salary costs down, which is part of it, but it also de-risks your team. So, you know, for whatever reason, as a solo founder, and again, there are select cases where we have invested in a solo founder. It de-risks that investment because there's 2 people committed to this full time. And I do have to say, where we do have investments in solo founders, they've either come in with a small team behind them, and we've had to get confidence in that team's like long-term sort of connected to the business. But they've also really struggled to move at pace that the others do, where there are, you know, 2 or 3 people committed to the business full time to take a full run at things. So that's our that's why we have a preference. There are stats around you know, founder success. And it's typically 2 to 3 people team that can execute at pace. So that's a big part for us as well. Again, there are always outliers where VC at the end of the day, you show us a nice opportunity that you can you know, convince us you can execute on. We'll give you some money, but there's a recipe for a reason. I'm just really conscious of time. Nicola, that was a Y Combinator, but don't do that until you've spent at least 4 weeks with us. Any last final questions, thoughts, concerns, and I'll wrap up. No? Awesome. Well, Joe and Renee, always a pleasure to see your lovely faces. Yes, I hope you all enjoyed being privy to the three of us catching up. They're busy running businesses. Once people move into portfolio, they forget all about me. So when I get the opportunity to catch up on everything that they're doing, I definitely run at it. We've got more AMAs coming up, and please reach out to Rani or myself if you want any sort of further information. As we said, applications are open. We're meeting some really interesting founders at the moment that looks like we'll be joining the cohort, so you'll be in some incredible company. We're very lucky, plug for the Sydney office. Rani's down in Melbourne. I
And
have this.
plug for Brisbane.
Oh
Come
yeah,
on.
yes, of course. Well, now that you're up in Brisbane, I keep forgetting. So, we're very lucky in the Sydney office to have some decent space. So Renee's been using our founder space for quite some time. We have quite a few of the portfolio companies that drop in and out, so you'll get the pleasure of their company. Renee, sorry, Joe, I think we'll be pulling up stops at the precinct with Stefan.
There's an event there next week.
It's our launch party.
I've been conned into ticking people off at the door.
They're putting you to work.
I'll be
Brilliant.
there as well. So see you there.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, look, I mean, it's a beautiful space in Brisbane. It's nicer than Sydney.
I don't. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. All right. Beck, I have seen you. Lovely to see your lovely face as well. Thanks everybody. I hope you got a lot out of that. If there's any questions that pop up, I know we threw a lot at you. Please reach out to Rani or myself. We're always happy to jump on a call. But Renee, Joe, much love. Till next time.
Thank you. You too.
See you,
See you,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye bye, guys.